If you're joining us, we as a church, we started something actually about 5 weeks ago now, where as a church, we're just going to go through the Bible from the front cover to the back. And our idea is this, that on Sundays, we'll kind of have an overview or a recap of some of the things that we've just been reading together on our own throughout the week. So if you are just joining us, we've started in the book of Genesis. We're in the fifth of what'll be 6 weeks, so there's just 2 weeks left in Genesis. There's plenty of time to still catch up to where we're at. Feel free to start reading along with us. We're going to go through Genesis and then Exodus and then Leviticus by the end of this year. Today, I want to invite you to turn with me in your Bibles to chapter 25. Last week, if you were here, we talked about Abraham and God's call upon Abraham's life and the relationship that he forged with Abraham. In the book of Genesis, the action moves, so to speak, from Abraham to his grandson Jacob. Abraham had a son named Isaac, and there are some things that happen in Isaac's life, but the major action begins then in Jacob's life, his grandson. So last week we talked about Abraham. This week we're going to talk about Jacob. So if you'll join me in Genesis chapter 25, we're going to start right at the very not at the beginning, but in the middle of this chapter. The very beginning of the chapter details the death of Abraham, and then beginning in verse 19, we pick up with Jacob's life, so that's where we're going to start. Verse 19 says this: "This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, from Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, 'Why is this happening to me?' So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.'" So Isaac's wife, Rebekah, becomes pregnant. There are twins that are in her womb, and there's something going on. They're jostling, and it's a strange pregnancy. And so she prays, and God answers and says, okay, this is the reason why. There are two nations within your womb, and they're jostling each other. And what's going to happen is that the older is going to serve the younger. And I want to just take note of something here, that before these babies are born, before they've developed a personality or taken any actions in their life whatsoever, God has already determined ahead of hand what the course, fate, and direction of their lives are going to be. Which, by the way, is a theme that runs throughout the entire Bible. This theme that God ultimately is the one who directs our paths from beginning to end. In fact, there's a psalm that I really love. It's Psalm 139. And the psalm writer says this: "O Lord, you've searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You discern my going out and my coming in. You perceive my thoughts from afar." He goes on to say, "Before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely." In other words, before I even begin to form a sentence, you know what I'm going to say. Later in that psalm, he says this: "All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them ever came to be." You know, it strikes me we don't often live like that. I mean, we live thinking that, okay, I'm in control of my life, I'm making all the decisions I'm making, I'm striving for certain things and aiming at certain things, and ultimately I'm the captain of my own destiny, I'm in charge of my own fate, I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps. We don't often think the way that psalmist did, that, okay, before we were ever born, before we ever uttered a word, before we ever spoke or interacted or developed a personality, every last day was written in God's book. And so he has a book of our life. And before we started this day, everything that would happen, every interaction we'd have, it's there on the page. And tomorrow's the same. And the day after that is the same. We think, as we live out our lives, that we're totally in control. But what the Bible says, and it says it plainly in many different places, is that God is the one who, before we ever do anything, He's held us in the palm of our hands and is determined each and every day, and at least here in Genesis chapter 25, before these two babies are born, God has already decided ahead of time what the course and direction of their life is going to be. The older is going to serve the younger. This is how the story then goes forward. Verse 24, "When the time came for her to give birth. There were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, and with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Let's just talk about that name, Jacob. The Hebrew word for the name Jacob is actually a word which means he grasps the heel. And the story here is that as these twins were being born, that Esau came out first, and then Jacob grabbed a hold of his heel and was born grasping at Esau's heel. And the interesting thing about this, it's the same in Hebrew as it is in English. We have words that have certain connotations, and it just so happens in the Hebrew language that this idea of grasping the heel literally means someone who deceives. So his name means something like deceiver. We have this in English, a very similar thing. Like if someone says, he's just pulling your leg, right? We don't literally, right? We mean something more along the lines of what? If someone's pulling our leg, what are they doing? Fooling us, not telling the truth, deceiving us. And in Hebrew, if you grasp the heel, then you're a deceiver. So think about this. I mean, he was born grasping his brother's heel, and they literally named him Deceiver. That's his name. This is how the story moves forward. In verse 27, it says, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. And he said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished. And the Bible says that's why he was called Edom. The Hebrew word Edom means red. By the way, Esau's name, Esau means hairy. Remember when he was born, he was both red and full of hair. And so they called him Esau, but they gave him the nickname Edom. So he's either hairy or he's red. Hairy or big red, I guess, right? And so this is who he is. By the way, as you continue to read forward, there's going to be a nation called the Edomites. They are all the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau. Anyway, here's the deal. Esau was like a man's man. He went out, he hunted, he was an outdoorsman, he was ruddy, big, red, hairy guy, burly, and Isaac was like, that's my boy. Jacob was sort of a soft mama's boy who liked to stay home. And he was in the kitchen cooking. And Esau, the man's man, dad's boy, came home, big red, he's hungry. Hey, give me some of that stew. And Jacob replies in verse 31, first, sell me your birthright. And Esau says, look, I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me? Let's talk about birthright for a second, just so we know what's going on. In Hebrew culture, in that day, this was the idea. The firstborn had what was called the birthright. And that meant a number of different things. For instance, when the estate was divided, when the parents would pass on, the firstborn, it was just expected, would get like a double or triple portion, would get the major portion of that birthright. It had to do with kind of position and authority in the family when decisions needed to be made. It was the older son who, it was his birthright to sort of lead the family, right? When it would come to passing the blessing from father to son, it would be the oldest son who would receive the biggest blessing from the father. And Jacob, and every time we hear his name, we should just hear this word deceiver, he sees his moment. He sees a moment to grasp at something, and his brother is just starving. He's like, okay, I'll give you some of this food, but first, you pass the birthright to me. And Esau says, well, man, I'm just starving. What good is it to me? Just I don't need a birthright. I'm going to die, so just give me some of that stew. And deceiver, Jacob, says, swear to me first. And the Bible says, so he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then he got up, and it says, so Esau despised his birthright. This is the first time where Jacob lives up to his name. He tricks his brother into selling or giving him the birthright for just a little bit of stew. We're going to skip chapter 26. We don't have time to just kind of cover everything. But I want you to look with me at chapter 27, because there's the next moment that really plays large in the story of Jacob's life. It says in verse 1, when Isaac, the father, was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "And here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I'm now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now, Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Jacob responds. He says to his mom, "But my brother Esau's a hairy man. I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than my blessing." And so he has this moment. It's like a moment of pause, like, "Mom, I hear what you're telling me to do, but listen, I mean, he might catch me. I mean, I'm a smooth-skinned, soft-skinned boy. I'm not the kind of ruddy, hairy man my brother is. If I go in there and he reaches out to touch me, he's going to feel my smooth skin. He's going to know I'm not him. I'd be tricking him." His mother responds and says, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." The Bible says he went out, he got them, he brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on the younger son Jacob. She covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins. She handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" I'm going to pause here. This question is such an important question for us to just take note of. His father calls out, "Who is it?" This is his now second off-ramp, right? He can stop and be truthful, but he lives up to his name, and he answers, and he says, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." And Isaac asked his son, "How'd you find it so quickly, my son?" And it's fascinating what he does. He actually calls God into the picture with his deceit and lies. He says, "The Lord," catch the pronoun here, "your God gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so that I can touch you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." The Bible says Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." It says he did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him, and he asked, "Are you really my son Esau?" This is now his third off-ramp. But he says, "I am." Now it's important to kind of take note of a couple facts here. How is it that Jacob can pull this deceit off? It's because there is a cloud of darkness over the situation. It's certainly daytime. But we read just at the very opening of this chapter that the father was old and was going blind, and so there was a darkness that had come over him. And so although he still has all his other faculties, he can still smell, so that when he comes close, he smells Esau's clothes. He can still touch, so that as he touches the goat skins on his hands, he feels that the hands are hairy. He still has all his other faculties, but there's a cloak of darkness that allows him to perpetrate this deceit. And when the father smells him and touches him, he says, "Well, you sound a lot like Jacob, but I guess you're Esau." And he gives this blessing, which is in the middle of verse 27. "The smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and of the earth's riches, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you, be blessed. So he gives him this blessing about his brothers like bowing down to him and him being in control and him receiving the blessing. Well, what happens next is that Esau comes back. He's hunted the game. He's made the stew. He brings it in, and he offers it to his father. His father says, "Who is this?" And he says, "I'm Esau. I'm your firstborn." And Isaac realizes at the moment he's been tricked. He's been deceived. In fact, if you look at verse 35, he actually says to Esau, he says, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." And I want you to see what it was that Esau said. This is so important. He said, "Isn't he rightly named," see the word? "Jacob, deceiver? Like, didn't you give him a great name, that deceiver? He's so deceitful." In fact, his next sentence is this: "He has deceived me these 2 times. First he took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." He asks his father for another blessing. His father gives him the second best blessing, but Esau is hopping mad. And we won't take the time to read all the details now. You can do so later. But he says to himself, "You know what? My dad's going to be dead soon, and you know how I'm going to console myself? I'm going to kill him." And mom finds out what he plans to do to his mama's boy, and so she calls him in and says, "Hey, you got to get out of here." And she actually goes and works things out with Isaac so that Jacob gets sent on his way. He gets sent with nothing, but he goes to save his life, because although he's been grasping for things, although he's wanting to make his life better, although he's been trying to just get a better position, better authority, better things in life, he now realizes, because his brother's ready to kill him, that he's got to go with nothing. And so actually he departs. It becomes very clear that he leaves with nothing other than the shirt on his back. In fact, by the time we get to chapter 28, there's a scene where just as he's leaving the promised land, he stops at this city named Bethel. And as he's lying down for the night, it says he actually finds a nearby stone and takes it and uses the stone for a pillow, which means this: he doesn't even have a pack to put under his head as he falls asleep at night. Here's this guy who's been striving, who's been grasping, who's been clawing, trying to manipulate things and get to the top, and he leaves with nothing. Well, it was there, as his head was lying on the stone, that God showed up to him for the first time and spoke words to him and said, "Jacob, I'm God." And he has this vision of this staircase going up to heaven with angels ascending and descending on it with God at the top. And God says, "Jacob, I'm going to be with you. I am your God, and I am with you on this journey you're about to take. I am with you." And Jacob actually wakes up from that vision, and he puts a monument there, and he calls the place God's house. And he says, "I've met God." And then he leaves from there to go to his uncle Laban's house. When he gets there, and we won't take time to read all the details, the first thing he sees as he gets there is this young, beautiful girl. He instantly, love at first sight, falls in love. The girl's name is Rachel. And he finds out that it's his uncle's daughter, their family. This is someone he can marry. So he goes home with her. And he says to his uncle, "Listen, I want to marry your daughter." Of course, in that day, in order to marry someone, you had to bring a bride price. And he had nothing, right? He just left with a shirt on his back. He didn't even have a pillow. He's got to put a rock there. He has nothing. So he says this, "Hey, I'll sell myself into slavery for you for 7 years if that can serve as a bride price. I'll work for you all that time." And Laban agrees. And so he begins to work. And the Bible says that those 7 years, he was just so enamored, so in love, so taken with this girl, that those 7 years went by like a couple days to him. And the time comes for him to marry the daughter, and he comes to the father and says, "Okay, now I've worked 7 years, give me my wife." And Laban throws this wedding feast, and the way weddings worked at that time is that there would be this large feast, and then the father would dress the daughter up in the bride's clothes, and she'd go into his tent, and it would be nighttime, and marriage would happen, right? In the dark of night. And it all went down that way. He went into the tent, he met his bride, they became one with one another. The next morning, he wakes up. You got to see this. It's great. Chapter 29. Chapter 29. I want you to look at verse 25. When morning came, there was Leah. What a morning, right? And so Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" And I want to just take note of how the deception happened, right? How it was possible. Because it's such an irony. It was because it was dark, right? You couldn't see. One daughter got dressed up to look like the other. And I want you the irony gets so thick here as you hear Laban's reply in verse 26. He says, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." You remember what the issue was in the deception before? It was a whole older, younger thing, right? Where the younger's grasping to have what the older has, and it's all done in the cloak of darkness. And then here in the cloak of darkness, in the middle of the night, there's this issue between younger and older, and it's like it just smacks with irony. Oh, well, here, unlike what you do, the older goes first. And the deceiver, Jacob, has himself been what? Deceived. There is a way in which God is at work here. Well, as the story goes forward, Jacob then says, "Listen, how could you do this?" And Laban says, "Okay, look, I'll give you Rachel as well, but first you have to be a slave for me 7 more years." And Jacob can say nothing because that's who he's really been working for all these years. And so now for 7 more years, he has to work as Laban's slave. At the end of those then 14 years, he goes to Laban and he says, "Okay, I'm ready to leave. I've worked for you. It's time to go home." And Laban responds, he says, "Well, wait a second. You can go, but you've been working as my slave, which means that you don't own anything. It all belongs to me. And so you could go, but the kids, your wives, they'll have to stay here, and everything you think you own, it's all mine." At which point, Jacob is just brought to his knees. He's still a guy after these 14 years with nothing. And they start talking, and he says, "Look, I've been working for you. Can't you see how God's blessed you?" In fact, Laban's flocks had just grown with Jacob being the one who's doing all the work. God had been with him. He says, "Look, you've seen how it's gone. Isn't there some way we can work this out?" And Laban says, "Okay, here's what we'll do." And apparently in the flock at that time, they had sheep and goats, which were either one whole color, solid color, like white or black. And then there were a number of sheep that were speckled or striped or spotted or multicolored. And Laban says, "Okay, this is what we'll do. From here on out, any sheep or goats that are born that are multicolored or striped or spotted or speckled, you can have those. But the single color, they'll all be mine." And you know what Laban did when they agreed on this? He went into the flock and he removed all the spotted ones, all the speckled, all the multicolored, so that all that was left was the single-colored animals. And it's as though, as Laban does this, he thinks, "Okay, I've got them trapped forever." You all know how genetics work, right? The kids are going to look like the parents. And it's very unlikely that we're ever going to get speckled, spotted, multicolored sheep or goats out of these single-colored sheep and goats. But, again, where Jacob has no control over things, God arranges everything, and soon there are spotted, speckled, and multicolored sheep and goats that get born. And Jacob starts working the system so that the really strong ones he's mating, so they're all becoming spotted and speckled. And just in a few years, 5-6 years, the whole flock is spotted, speckled, and multicolored. It all belongs to Jacob. At which point in the story, Laban, and particularly his sons, become very angry. Look what this guy has done. He's cheated us somehow. We just know it. And, Jacob sees, man, if I stay here, I'm in trouble. These guys are going to do something to me. And so he's actually stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's gotten everything there, but Laban and the sons are going to probably kill him. If he goes home, Edom's probably going to kill him. But God shows up in this vision and says, "Okay, time to go home." So he talks to his wife. They all decide they're going to leave. That they take off. And there's a long story. I won't take. You guys got to read it on your own. But finally, it's time to go home. And I want to pick this up in chapter 32 because I think this is actually, in chapter 32, this is where the meat of it all is. This is the heart, the climax of the story. This is how it all goes down. We'll start in verse 1. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named the place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the hill country of Edom. he instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my master Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I've been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, manservants and maidservants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord that I may find favor in your eyes." So in other words, as he's going, he's sending messengers to Esau, just hoping like, okay, hopefully he's gotten over it. Verse 6, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Ah, great. Right? I mean, does he just want to bring a welcome party? Is this good news? Or are these guys out to kill us? Or what goes on? I mean, he starts to become anxious. He starts to become nervous. In fact, look at the very next verse. It says, "In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. Here is Jacob, after all of this, still living up to his name, still trying to manipulate, control, grab. I hope you catch the flavor of what he did. He's like, okay, my brother's coming with 400 men. Let's divide up the family into two groups here. The first group will go in the front. Then the second group will go behind them. And then Jacob has in mind that he's going to take up the rear. And if Esau and his 400 men come and they're attacking, then they can kill off the first group. I'll grab the second group and hopefully we'll escape." That's what he has in mind. I mean, he's like a coward. Like he won't go meet his own brother. I mean, he's filled with fear. He's just trying to manipulate and control the situation as though hopefully he can somehow or another control the outcome of this whole thing. That's when God shows up. And there's this account of Jacob wrestling with God where everything changes. Let's pick it up here in verse 22. That night, Jacob got up. He took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. So the family goes first over the river, and he decides, I'm going to stay here in the back. And it says, a man wrestled with him till daybreak. And at this point in the story, there's a man. Again, catch the darkness. We can't identify who this man is. There's just this man. Now, let's talk about wrestling. Okay, right? So guys especially, right? You're walking in a dark alley and all of a sudden there's an adversary in front of you and he grabs hold of you and you've got to like fight for your life now, right? I mean, you're going to give it your all, like everything you have, like all your strength. And apparently these guys, they'd go at it all night long wrestling each other. And you would assume that not only are you giving it all your strength, but that your adversary is also just putting everything in, right? That's one particular way of looking at wrestling. Second idea. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was here actually in the second service, sitting right over here. And when my brothers and I were little, we also used to wrestle. And at least from my perspective, I remember I was like giving it my all, like, come on, Dad. And you just run at him and throw yourself and try and grab his neck. And right, like from my perspective, from my end, I'm like giving it everything I have. But of course, as a father, there are times when you might like the son sort of feel like they're getting the upper hand, but whenever he wanted, he could just, boom, right? And you're like a kid, like, just at any moment, like there's that, when you're a kid, you think your dad's giving his all too. But the truth of the matter, he's just given enough so that you can keep giving your all. And it turns out that this wrestling match is more like this second situation, father-son, than it is like the first situation. So he's wrestling this man all night long. He can't see who it is. And then finally, this is what we read. It says in verse 25, when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. And the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go until you bless me. So here's the situation. Jacob's wrestling. He's giving it his all. He's going at it, right? He thinks he's giving everything. And then as daybreak comes, he's been wrestling all night long. The man's like, okay. He reaches out, and the Bible says he just touched, which is not an aggressive or strong move, just touched. And where he touched, I think, is interesting because you probably realize, like, this set of muscles on your body are the strongest muscles you have, right, physically? That's where he touched Jacob's strongest, okay, ready? Whoop. Ah! And from then on, his hip was wrenched. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. It was like the father's way of letting him know, like, all right, It's like all along he'd been thinking, like, okay, it could go either direction. And then finally he realized, like, okay, this is no ordinary person. I've just been wrestling with God. And when he realizes he's been wrestling with God, he grabs hold and he won't let go. And God says, okay, it's daybreak, let go. And he's like, no, not till you give me your blessing. Just give me your blessing. And I want you to see this. This is so awesome. Verse 27, the man asked him, ready for the question? What is your name? Hey, who are you? Remember when that was asked before? In the cloak of darkness, his father says, who are you? This is now the second question, second time this question gets asked. And this time, since he now realizes he's been in the presence of God, like up close and personal with the presence of God, it's like he has this moment, I'll call it a moment of surrender, where he finally says, well, I'm Jacob. I'm a deceiver. I'm a trickster. I'm a manipulator. It's like a confession. Well, I'm just Jacob. It's like at that moment of surrender where he's willing to just say, okay, I'm just me. It's like God's like, okay, finally we have something to work with. And it's at that moment that this man says to him, well, your name will no longer be deceiver, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. By the way, the word Israel means in Hebrew something like to struggle with God. And he says, your name is going to be Israel because you've now struggled with God and you've overcome. In other words, you've realized that this entire time you've been wrestling with me and you've been trying to grab and take hold of the situation and claw and manipulate and maneuver and, become captain of your own destiny and master of your own fate. And finally, at this moment, you surrender. And at that moment, now in this wrestling match, you've acknowledged, like, okay, you're Jacob and I'm God. You see that? Like at that moment when he said, I'm Jacob, he just surrendered. And that's really what I want to talk about with us today, this whole idea of surrender. And by the way, I want you to see the difference that it makes. Look at chapter 33, just quickly. It says, Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Apparently at this point he acknowledges, okay, I'm Jacob and you're God. And this whole time I've been trying to manipulate and control the situation, but I surrender. You're in control. And instead of being filled with fear and anxiety, he now finds the strength and courage he needs to not be in the very back, but to walk up to the front. And he just acknowledges, like, okay, you're God. And whatever happens from here, you're in control. You see that? Surrender. I don't know what your circumstances are, what you've been through, what have been your pains, but I do know this. God promises to be with each one of us in Jesus Christ. In fact, there's a verse in the Bible that says if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, right? I'm not in control anymore. I surrender, Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God did it, that God raised him from the dead, that God's in control, that he's the one who leads and guides our life, it says you will be saved. And I would suggest to you that this whole story of Jacob, this whole story of Israel is the story of all God's people, because here's the situation. We all, in one way or another, are striving against God. Like we hear this truth, right? He's God. He's in control. He not only created us, but he destined all our lives. Every one of our days is written in our book. And yet most of us, we're still trying to manipulate the situation. Claw, grab, control. I mean, when things don't go our way, we will guilt trip people till they're miserable even if it doesn't turn out right. I mean, that's how we are. We're all like striving, struggling. And by the way, as we're doing, we're saying, well, I don't need you, God. I got this on my own. And there's this pride that we have in our heart. We can do it, right? And all along, in the person of Jesus Christ, who the Bible calls Emmanuel, which means God with us, God is with us. And he's using every circumstance of our life, every painful moment, every difficulty as we wrestle with him to just open our eyes to see that we are not God. He alone is God. And even when it comes to salvation, there's so many people, I got this on my own. I can fix this problem. I can stop. God sent his son Jesus to pay the price, to remind us that he is God, we are not. And the Bible just asks again and again and again that we surrender. And I don't know the circumstances of your life as you walk through these doors today, but why not? Why not today surrender? Like, you know what? I'm not God. I'm just me. And by the way, I've had enough. So I surrender. And I think the Bible just promises that God will be with us. He'll lead and guide our life. And if we surrender to him, then there are greater things in store for us than we could ever ask or imagine. And so why not today?